The sun was high over Nottinghamshire, casting golden light across the rolling hills and lush forests that surrounded the village of Loxley. At the heart of this idyllic landscape stood Loxley Manor, a grand yet modest estate that had been home to the Loxley family for generations. Robin of Loxley, the last of his line, ruled over his lands with a fair and just hand. The people of Loxley respected him not only for his noble birth but also for his kindness and generosity. He was known to personally visit the fields during harvest, offering a helping hand and sharing in the bounty with his tenants. Robin's days were filled with the duties of a lord, overseeing the well-being of his estate and ensuring that his people were cared for. He often rode through the forests on his trusted horse, taking in the sights and sounds of the land he loved so dearly. The woods were his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of nobility and simply be Robin, a man of the earth, connected to the land that had been his family's legacy. Despite his noble birth, Robin had always felt a strong kinship with the common folk. He treated his servants and villagers with the same respect he afforded his peers, earning their unwavering loyalty in return. It was not uncommon for him to join a village feast, sharing a meal and laughter with his people. This bond with the commoners set him apart from many other lords, who viewed their serfs as little more than property. Yet, for all the responsibilities that came with his title, Robin's heart belonged to only one person, Marian. Lady Marian Fitzwalter was a vision of grace and beauty, the daughter of a neighboring nobleman. She and Robin had grown up together, their friendship blossoming into a deep and abiding love. Marian was as spirited as she was kind, often challenging Robin with her quick wit and sharp mind. She was a skilled archer, having learned from Robin himself, and the two often spent their afternoons in friendly competition, testing their skills in the woods. Their love was one of equals, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. Marian admired Robin's sense of justice and his unwavering commitment to his people, while Robin was captivated by Marian's courage and her unwavering belief in what was right. Together, they dreamed of a future where they could build a life of peace and happiness in their beloved Nottinghamshire. Their moments together were precious, stolen away in quiet glades and under the shade of ancient oaks. The world seemed to fade away when they were together, leaving only the two of them in a perfect bubble of love and understanding. Robin often spoke of their future, of the family they would one day have, and the legacy they would leave behind. Marian would smile, her eyes full of hope, as she imagined a life filled with love, laughter, and the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls of Loxley Manor. But their idyllic life was not to last. One crisp autumn morning, a messenger from Nottingham arrived at Loxley Manor, bearing a letter with the seal of the Sheriff of Nottingham. The sight of the seal sent a chill through Robin's heart, for the sheriff was not a man to be trifled with. He was known throughout the land as a ruthless enforcer of the law, more interested in filling his coffers and those of his superiors than in administering justice. Robin broke the seal and read the letter with growing unease. The sheriff was summoning him to Nottingham Castle, a summons that could not be ignored. The reason for the summons was not detailed, but Robin knew that it could only mean one thing: the sheriff had a task for him, something that would pull him away from the life he loved. Marian found Robin in the great hall, the letter still clutched in his hand. She saw the worry etched on his face and knew that something was terribly wrong. "What is it, Robin?" she asked softly, placing a hand on his arm. That he handed her the letter. watching as her eyes scanned the parchment. Her face paled as she reached the end, understanding the gravity of the situation. "The Crusades," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "He's sending you to fight in the Crusades." Robin nodded, his heart heavy. The sheriff was well within his rights to conscript him, and to refuse would be to invite the wrath of the law upon Loxley. He could not risk his people's suffering for his defiance. "I must go," he said quietly, though every fiber of his being wanted to stay, to hold on to the life they had built together. Marian's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, her strength and resolve shining through. "Then we will make the most of the time we have left," she said firmly, taking his hand in hers. "And I will wait for you, Robin, no matter how long it takes." Robin pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he would return to her, no matter the cost. For Marian was his heart, and Nottinghamshire his soul, and he would fight to protect them both with every breath in his body. The days leading up to Robin's departure were marked by a somber silence that hung over Loxley Manor like a dark cloud. The once vibrant estate, filled with the sounds of laughter and life, had become a place of quiet dread. Robin went about his duties with a heavy heart, his thoughts consumed by the impending separation from everything he held dear. On the morning of his departure, the villagers of Loxley gathered to bid their lord farewell. The men, women, and children who had known Robin all their lives stood in solemn respect as he mounted his horse. Their faces, usually bright with smiles, were now etched with concern. They knew that the Crusades were a perilous venture, one from which many did not return. Marian stood by his side, her hand tightly gripping his, as if trying to hold on to him for just a little longer. Her strength, which had always been a source of comfort to Robin, seemed to falter in those final moments. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. Robin leaned down, brushing a soft kiss against her lips. "I promise, Marian. No matter what happens, I will find my way back to you." With those words, he turned his horse towards the road that would take him to Nottingham, and from there to the Holy Land. The villagers watched as he rode away, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that their beloved lord was leaving for a war that had claimed so many before him. As the distance between them grew, Marian remained standing at the gates of Loxley Manor, her gaze fixed on the fading figure of the man she loved. She knew the dangers that lay ahead, but she also knew that Robin was a man of his word. And so, with a heart full of hope and fear, she silently prayed for his safe return. The journey to the Holy Land was long and arduous, filled with the weariness of travel and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Robin, along with the other conscripted men, endured the grueling conditions of the march, each step taking them further from the homes they had left behind. When they finally arrived at the Crusader camp, the reality of the war hit them with full force. The camp was a chaotic sprawl of tents, horses, and men, all preparing for the battles to come. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, metal, and fear, a constant reminder of the violence that awaited them. Robin quickly adapted to the harsh conditions of life on the battlefield. He trained relentlessly, honing his skills with the bow and sword, knowing that his survival depended on his ability to fight. The nights were often cold and restless, filled with the sounds of distant battles and the cries of the wounded. Sleep was a luxury, and even when it came, it was plagued by nightmares of what the next day might bring. The battles themselves were brutal and unforgiving. Robin found himself in the midst of a war that was far removed from the chivalric ideals he had once believed in. The Crusades were not the noble quest he had imagined, but a violent struggle for power and land, where lives were lost for the sake of conquest. Each day on the battlefield was a fight for survival, and Robin quickly learned to harden his heart against the horrors he witnessed. But no matter how much he tried to detach himself, the sight of death and suffering weighed heavily on his soul. He fought because he had to, not because he believed in the cause, and with each battle, his disillusionment grew. Amidst the chaos of war, Robin found solace in the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers. The men who fought beside him were a diverse group, drawn from all corners of England and beyond. They were farmers, blacksmiths, and laborers, ordinary men who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Despite their differences, they were united by the shared experience of war, and in that, they formed an unbreakable bond. One man in particular, Alan, became Robin's closest friend. A minstrel by trade, Alan had joined the Crusades in search of adventure, but like Robin, he had quickly become disillusioned by the reality of the conflict. Alan's wit and humor were a welcome relief from the grimness of their situation, and his music provided a rare moment of peace in the midst of the madness. In the quiet moments between battles, the soldiers would gather around Alan as he played his lute, singing songs of home and of the loved ones they had left behind. These moments of respite were fleeting, but they were cherished, a reminder of the lives they had once known. Robin and Alan often spoke of their homes, of Nottinghamshire and the green forests that seemed like a distant dream. Robin would tell tales of Marian, of the life they had planned together, while Alan spoke of the open road and the freedom he had once enjoyed as a wandering minstrel. Their conversations were a way to escape, if only for a little while, from the harsh reality of the war. The bond between the soldiers was forged in the crucible of battle, and it was this bond that kept them going, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. They fought not just for themselves, but for each other, knowing that in the heat of battle, their lives depended on the man beside them. As the months turned into years, Robin became a seasoned warrior, respected by his comrades for his skill and leadership. But the war had taken its toll on him. The man who had left Nottinghamshire full of hope and love was now a hardened soldier, haunted by the things he had seen and done. The promise he had made to Marian was the only thing that kept him going, the hope that one day, he would return to the life he had left behind. But deep down, Robin knew that even if he did return, he would never be the same man he had been when he left. The war had changed him, in ways he could not yet fully understand. And as the days dragged on, the thought of Nottinghamshire, of Marian, and of the life he had once known, became a distant memory, overshadowed by the horrors of the Crusades. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape as Robin and his men marched towards their latest battleground. The Crusades had dragged on for years, each day blending into the next, marked by bloodshed and loss. Yet this day felt different, as a sense of unease settled over the soldiers. As they approached the encampment, Robin caught sight of a familiar figure clad in dark armor, his presence commanding and foreboding. Sir Guy of Gisborne, the commander of their unit and the Sheriff of Nottingham's most loyal enforcer, stood tall on a rise overlooking the camp. Gisborne was a man of ruthless efficiency, known for his cruelty and unwavering loyalty to the church's cause. His reputation preceded him, and even the most battle-hardened soldiers feared him. Robin had known of Gisborne before the Crusades, their paths crossing briefly in Nottinghamshire. But here, in the midst of war, Robin had come to see the true nature of the man, a merciless commander who viewed his men as pawns in a game of power. There was no room for compassion in Gisborne's world, only the cold calculation of victory. As Robin approached, Gisborne turned to face him, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of disdain and suspicion. There was no love lost between the two men. Gisborne saw Robin as a threat, a lord who commanded respect not through fear, but through loyalty and honor. It was a form of power Gisborne could never understand. Lord Loxley, Gisborne greeted him, the title dripping with sarcasm. "I trust you're prepared for today's task." Robin inclined his head slightly, keeping his expression neutral. "As always, Sir Guy. What are your orders?" Gisborne's lips curled into a smirk as he gestured towards a group of soldiers gathered around a makeshift pen. "We captured a band of Saracen prisoners during the last skirmish. The Cardinal has ordered their execution, as an example to those who would dare resist the will of God." Robin's stomach tightened at the words. Executing prisoners, especially those who were unarmed and defenseless, was something he had always struggled with. It went against everything he believed in as a knight, as a man. But defying Gisborne's orders was not an option, at least, not openly. "Is this truly necessary?" Robin asked, his voice calm but edged with quiet defiance. "They are defeated. Killing them will not bring us any closer to victory." Gisborne's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer to Robin, his voice low and threatening. "Do not question the orders of the Cardinal, Loxley. These men are enemies of the Church, and they must be made an example of. If you are too weak to carry out your duty, I will find someone else who can." Robin held Gisborne's gaze, his jaw clenched in silent anger. He knew there was no arguing with a man like Gisborne, not here, not now. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and Robin's resolve to find another way began to grow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie red glow across the camp, the soldiers gathered around the pen where the prisoners were held. The Saracens, their hands bound and faces streaked with dirt and blood, huddled together, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. Among them were men of all ages, from hardened warriors to boys barely old enough to hold a sword. Robin's heart ached as he looked upon them, seeing not enemies, but men who had been caught in the same brutal war he had. They were fathers, brothers, sons, just like the men who fought beside him. The injustice of their fate weighed heavily on him, and he struggled to find a way to intervene without provoking Gisborne's wrath. As the soldiers prepared for the execution, Robin's attention was drawn to a young boy among the prisoners. He couldn't have been more than 15, his eyes wide with terror as he clutched the hand of an older man, his father, Robin realized with a sinking heart. The boy's youthful face reminded Robin of his own younger self, full of dreams and hopes, now crushed under the weight of war. The father, a grizzled man with a weathered face, looked up at Robin as if sensing his inner turmoil. There was a plea in his eyes, a silent cry for mercy. Robin felt a surge of desperation. He had to do something, anything, to stop this senseless slaughter. As the executioner approached the prisoners, his sword glinting in the fading light, Robin stepped forward, his voice ringing out over the tense silence. "Wait!" All eyes turned to him, including Gisborne's, who looked at Robin with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. Robin felt the weight of their gazes, but he refused to back down. "Sir Guy, this boy is just a child," Robin continued, his voice firm. "He poses no threat to us. Let him live. Show the men that we are not barbarians, that we have mercy in our hearts." Gisborne's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. But it was quickly replaced by cold indifference. "Mercy?" Gisborne sneered. "There is no place for mercy in war, Loxley. The boy's fate was sealed the moment he took up arms against us. Now stand aside and let justice be done." Robin felt a surge of anger and helplessness as he looked from the boy to Gisborne. The other soldiers were watching, their expressions uncertain. Robin knew that if he pressed the issue, he would be putting himself and possibly others at risk. But he couldn't simply stand by and do nothing. Before he could make another plea, the boy's father suddenly threw himself at Robin's feet, begging in broken English. "Please, my lord. Spare my son. He is all I have left." Robin's heart broke at the man's words, but before he could respond, Gisborne strode forward and kicked the man aside, his face twisted with contempt. "Enough of this!" Gisborne barked. "Executioner, do your duty." The executioner hesitated for a moment, glancing at Robin as if seeking permission. But when Robin remained silent, unable to find the words that could save the boy, the executioner steeled himself and raised his sword. Time seemed to slow as Robin watched the sword arc through the air, the boy's terrified eyes locked on his own. A silent scream tore through Robin's soul as the blade found its mark, ending the boy's life in a single, brutal stroke. The father's anguished cries echoed through the camp as he cradled his son's lifeless body, his grief a palpable force that tore at Robin's heart. He felt sick, the weight of his failure pressing down on him like a physical burden. He had tried to save the boy, but in the end, he had been powerless to stop the cruelty of war. As the soldiers began to disperse, Gisborne turned to Robin, his expression cold and triumphant. "Remember this day, Loxley. Mercy is a weakness that will get you killed. You would do well to learn that lesson before it's too late." Robin said nothing, his eyes fixed on the father and son, now united in death. The image burned into his mind, a reminder of the cost of this war and the man he was becoming. As night fell over the camp, Robin retreated to the solitude of his tent, haunted by the faces of the boy and his father. He knew then that he could no longer be a part of this war, that he could no longer follow men like Gisborne who reveled in the suffering of others. But escaping the Crusades would not be easy, and returning to Nottinghamshire even less so. Still, as Robin lay awake that night, the seeds of a plan began to take root in his mind. He would find a way to leave this blood-soaked land behind, to return to the life he had left in Nottinghamshire. And when he did, he would fight against the injustice and tyranny that men like Gisborne represented. For the boy, for his father, and for all those who had been wronged, Robin swore he would make things right. The days following the execution weighed heavily on Robin's heart. The once clear purpose that had driven him to the Crusades, the defense of his homeland, the pursuit of justice, the glory of God, had become clouded with doubt. The images of the boy and his grieving father haunted him, a constant reminder of the brutality that had overtaken the righteousness of their cause. As the Crusades dragged on, Robin found himself questioning everything he once believed in. The lofty ideals of the church seemed distant and hollow in the face of the relentless slaughter, the endless cycle of violence and revenge. The men he fought alongside, once brothers in arms, had become hardened and callous, their humanity eroded by the horrors they witnessed daily. The orders from above no longer felt just, they felt like commands from a distant and uncaring power, more interested in wealth and control than in the souls of the men who fought in its name. Robin could no longer see the honor in what they were doing. Each battle, each village razed to the ground, each life taken only deepened his sense of despair. Robin's doubts grew as he witnessed the corruption and hypocrisy of those in command. The Crusades, once a holy mission, had become a pretext for the powerful to enrich themselves at the expense of the innocent. The spoils of war, gold, land, and power, seemed to matter more than the cause they claimed to fight for. The church's leaders, who preached compassion and mercy, turned a blind eye to the atrocities committed in their name. Each day, Robin felt more and more disconnected from the man he once was. The war had changed him, hardened him, but not in the way it had others. Instead of becoming indifferent to the suffering around him, Robin became more attuned to it, more determined to find another waypoint. One evening, as the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Robin sought out Sir Guy of Gisborne. He could no longer remain silent in the face of what he saw as a perversion of everything he believed in. He found Gisborne near the edge of the camp, sharpening his sword, his face a mask of concentration. "Sir Guy," Robin called out, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Gisborne looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption. "What is it, Loxley?" he asked, his tone dismissive. Robin took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. He knew this confrontation could not be avoided any longer. "I need to speak with you about our mission here, about what we are doing." Gisborne arched an eyebrow, setting down his sword and standing to face Robin fully. "And what, pray tell, do you have to say about our mission? Last I checked, you were a soldier, not a preacher." Robin ignored the jab, his eyes fixed on Gisborne's. "This war has lost its purpose, Sir Guy. We were told we came here to fight for God, to defend our people. But all I see is senseless killing, innocent lives destroyed, and a cause corrupted by greed." Gisborne's expression hardened, and he stepped closer to Robin, his voice low and threatening. "You tread on dangerous ground, Loxley. The Church has deemed this war holy, and it is not for you to question its purpose. We are here to do a job, to bring these heathens to heel, and to secure the future of our land." Robin stood his ground, his voice rising with emotion. "Is this what you call securing the future? Slaughtering children? Destroying villages? Taking lives without cause or mercy? This is not the way of a knight, nor is it the way of a man of God." Gisborne's eyes blazed with fury, and he grabbed Robin by the collar, pulling him close. "You dare question me? You dare question the church? You are nothing more than a disillusioned fool, Loxley. You will do as you are ordered, or I will personally see to it that you never return to Nottinghamshire." Robin felt the cold steel of Gisborne's threat, but he refused to back down. "If this is what we have become, then I want no part of it. I will not be complicit in this madness any longer." Gisborne shoved Robin away, his face twisted with contempt. "You are a coward, Loxley. Run back to your precious Nottinghamshire if you must. But know this, you will find no peace there. The world has changed, and if you cannot adapt, it will leave you behind." Robin said nothing more, turning on his heel and walking away. He had made his decision. He could no longer serve a cause that had lost its way, could no longer follow men like Gisborne who had forsaken their honor. It was time to return home, to Nottinghamshire, and to fight for what truly mattered. Robin's journey back to England was long and arduous. The road was fraught with dangers, both from the remnants of the war and from the treacherous lands he had to cross. But the thought of returning to Nottinghamshire, to Marian, and to the life he had left behind, kept him moving forward. As he neared his homeland, a sense of dread began to creep into his heart. He had been gone for so long, would Marian still be waiting for him? What had become of Nottinghamshire in his absence? And what kind of man had he become, after all that he had seen and done? When Robin finally arrived at the outskirts of Nottinghamshire, he was struck by how much had changed. The once thriving villages now seemed desolate, the fields untended, and the people weary and downtrodden. The war had taken its toll, not just on the distant battlefields, but here at home as well. Robin's heart sank as he approached his estate, only to find it in a state of disrepair. The land, once fertile and prosperous, was overgrown with weeds, the buildings falling into ruin. It was as if his absence had left a void that no one had been able to fill. As he made his way to the village, he was met with wary glances from the few people he encountered. They did not recognize him, nor did they seem to care who he was. The weight of the war, of years of suffering, had crushed their spirits. At last, Robin found his old friend, Friar Tuck, tending to the small church on the edge of the village. The friar looked older, wearier, but his face lit up with a mixture of joy and surprise when he saw Robin. "Robin! By the grace of God, you're alive!" Friar Tuck exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace him. Robin returned the embrace, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. "It's good to see you, Tuck. But tell me, what has happened here? What has become of Nottinghamshire?" Friar Tuck's expression grew somber as he led Robin to a bench outside the church. "Much has changed since you left, Robin. The Sheriff of Nottingham had you declared dead 2 years ago, in order to seize your lands and wealth. He claimed it was to fund the war effort, but the truth is far darker." Robin felt a surge of anger at the sheriff's betrayal, but he remained silent as Friar Tuck continued. "The sheriff, along with the corrupt cardinal, has been squeezing the people dry, raising taxes to unbearable levels, and forcing many to flee their homes. Those who couldn't pay were evicted and sent to the coal mines across the river, in a place they call the Slags. It's a miserable existence, Robin. The people are suffering, and there's little hope left. Robin clenched his fists, his heart burning with a renewed sense of purpose. He had left one war only to find another waiting for him at home. But this was a war he could not walk away from, a war he had to fight for the sake of his people, and Marian. Robin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Friar Tuck hesitated, a look of sadness crossing his face. "She's alive, Robin, but much has changed. She's involved with the resistance now, helping a man named Will Tillman who is leading the commoners in their fight against the sheriff. She's strong, but she's had to move on, Robin. She thought you were dead." Robin felt a pang of sorrow at Friar Tuck's words, but he knew he couldn't blame Marian for moving on. He had been gone for so long, and she had done what she had to survive. But knowing she was alive, knowing she was still fighting for what was right, gave Robin the strength he needed. "I have to see her, Tuck," Robin said, determination in his voice. "But first, I have to stop the sheriff and the cardinal. I won't let them continue to destroy our home." Friar Tuck nodded, his eyes filled with both hope and concern. "Be careful, Robin. The sheriff is a dangerous man, and he won't hesitate to crush anyone who stands in his way. But if anyone can bring him down, it's you." Robin stood, a sense of resolve settling over him. He had returned home to find Nottinghamshire in ruins, but he would not let it remain that way. He would fight for his people, for Marian, and for the honor that had been stolen from him. The Crusades had changed Robin of Loxley, but they had not broken him. And now, he would use all that he had learned, all that he had become, to right the wrongs that had been done to his homeland. The fight was far from over, it had only just begun. The journey back to Nottingham was fraught with a mix of anticipation and unease. Robin had been away for years, and with each passing mile, the weight of his experiences in the Crusades bore down on him. The familiar landscapes of his homeland, once a source of comfort, now seemed foreign and distant, as if time had eroded the bonds that once tied him to this place. As he approached Nottingham, Robin's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and dread. He longed to see Marian, to hold her in his arms again, to reclaim the life he had left behind. But he also feared what he might find, how much had changed, and whether he could ever truly return to the man he once was. The village of Nottingham was a shadow of its former self. The streets, once bustling with life and laughter, were now eerily quiet. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the faces of the few villagers he encountered were gaunt and hollow, their eyes devoid of hope. The war had taken its toll, not just on the battlefield, but here at home as well. Robin's footsteps faltered as he reached the gates of his estate. The land that had once flourished under his care was now overgrown with weeds, the buildings dilapidated and crumbling. The sight of his once proud home in such a state of disrepair sent a pang of sorrow through his heart. It was as if the very soul of Nottingham had withered in his absence. That he pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the manor, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty halls. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the lively gatherings and joyous celebrations that had once filled these rooms. Robin walked through the corridors, his footsteps stirring up dust that had settled over years of neglect. Finally, he reached the great hall, where a single ray of sunlight filtered through a cracked window, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air. Robin stood in the center of the room, his heart heavy with the weight of all that had been lost. This was his home, but it no longer felt like it. The Robin of Loxley who had left for the Crusades was not the same man who had returned. As Robin made his way into the village, he was met with strange looks from the few villagers who dared to venture outside. They stared at him as if they were seeing a ghost, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Whispers followed him as he walked, the murmur of voices growing louder with each step he took. Is it really him? Can't be, he's supposed to be dead. He looks just like him, but, the rumors spread like wildfire, and soon a small crowd began to gather around Robin, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and awe. Robin's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of their reactions. What had happened in his absence? Why were they looking at him as if he had risen from the grave? Finally, an elderly woman, her face lined with years of hardship, stepped forward. Her eyes widened as she looked at Robin, and she crossed herself, as if warding off an evil spirit. It can't be. Robin of Loxley? But you died 2 years ago. Robin's blood ran cold at her words. He shook his head, trying to comprehend what she was saying. What do you mean? I'm very much alive. How could anyone believe I was dead? The woman's voice trembled as she spoke, her gaze fixed on Robin as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. The sheriff, he declared you dead. Said you were killed in the Crusades, and that there was no body to bring home. He took your lands, your wealth, all in the name of the war effort. Robin staggered back, the full weight of her words crashing down on him. The sheriff had declared him dead. Had seized his lands and wealth. A cold fury began to burn in Robin's chest as he realized the extent of the betrayal. Everything he had fought for, everything he had left behind, had been stolen from him. How could this happen? Robin muttered, more to himself than to the crowd. But his question was met with silence, the villagers too afraid to speak out against the sheriff's treachery. At that moment, Robin knew that he could not return to the life he once knew. The man he had been was gone, replaced by someone forged in the fires of war and betrayal. The sheriff had taken everything from him, but Robin would not allow him to get away with it. He would reclaim what was rightfully his, and he would do whatever it took to bring the sheriff to justice. Determined to find answers, Robin made his way to the small church on the outskirts of the village, where he knew he would find his old friend, Friar Tuck. The friar had always been a man of wisdom and compassion, a trusted confidant who had guided Robin through many difficult times. If anyone could shed light on what had happened, it would be him. Robin found Friar Tuck tending to the garden outside the church, his once robust figure now slightly stooped with age and weariness. But when he looked up and saw Robin approaching, his face broke into a wide smile, and he hurried over to embrace his old friend. Robin. By the grace of God, you're alive. Friar Tuck exclaimed, his voice filled with genuine joy. I never thought I'd see you again, lad. Robin returned the embrace, feeling a sense of comfort in the familiar warmth of his friend's presence. But the joy was short-lived as the weight of everything he had learned pressed down on him. Tuck, what has happened here? They told me the sheriff declared me dead. That he took everything from me. Friar Tuck's expression darkened, and he led Robin to a bench under the shade of a large oak tree. They sat in silence for a moment before Tuck spoke, his voice heavy with sorrow. "It's true, Robin. After you left for the Crusades, things began to change. The sheriff grew more powerful, more corrupt. He claimed it was all in service to the war, but it was clear he had his own ambitions." Tuck paused, as if gathering his thoughts, before continuing. "2 years ago, word came that you had been killed in the Crusades. There was no body, no proof, but the sheriff seized the opportunity. He declared you dead, took your lands, your wealth, everything that was yours, and used it to further his own power. He's been bleeding the people dry ever since, raising taxes, evicting those who couldn't pay, and sending them to work in the coal mines across the river." Robin clenched his fists, the anger boiling within him as he listened to Tuck's words. "And Marian? What about her?" Friar Tuck's expression grew even more somber. "Marian is alive, Robin, but she's had to adapt to survive. She's been working with the resistance, helping a man named Will Tillman who's been leading the commoners against the sheriff. She's strong, but she's had to make difficult choices. She thought you were dead, Robin. She moved on." Robin felt a pang of sorrow at Tuck's words. The thought of Marian with someone else was a bitter pill to swallow, but he couldn't blame her. She had done what she needed to survive in his absence, and he couldn't fault her for that, but knowing she was alive, knowing she was still fighting for what was right, gave Robin the strength he needed. He had returned to find Nottinghamshire in ruins, but he would not let it remain that way. The sheriff had taken everything from him, but he would not take Robin's resolve. He stood, determination in his eyes. "Tuck, I'm going to stop the sheriff. I'm going to take back what he's stolen, and I'm going to bring him to justice. But I can't do it alone. Will you help me?" Friar Tuck looked at Robin, his eyes filled with both hope and concern. "You know I'll stand by you, Robin. But be careful. The sheriff is a dangerous man, and he won't hesitate to crush anyone who stands in his way." Robin nodded, a sense of purpose settling over him. He had come home to find everything changed, but he was not the same man who had left. The fight for Nottinghamshire was just beginning, and Robin of Loxley would lead the charge. The Sheriff of Nottingham, once a man of modest authority, had transformed into a tyrant during Robin's absence. The power he had accrued was not earned through noble deeds or righteous acts, but through manipulation, deceit, and sheer ruthlessness. His iron grip over Nottingham was felt in every corner of the land, from the grandest estates to the humblest of homes. The sheriff's rule was marked by a relentless pursuit of wealth and power. He imposed harsh taxes on the already struggling villagers, justifying his actions as necessary contributions to the war effort. But everyone knew that much of the money was being funneled into the sheriff's own coffers, lining his pockets and those of his corrupt allies. Fear permeated the air in Nottingham. The sheriff's enforcers, a group of brutal men loyal only to him, roamed the streets, ensuring that no one dared to oppose his rule. They were quick to punish any sign of dissent, often resorting to violence to keep the populace in line. The once vibrant town was now a place of despair, its people too terrified to speak out, let alone rise up against their oppressor. The sheriff's tyranny extended beyond mere financial exploitation. He controlled the local courts, ensuring that anyone who posed a threat to his authority was swiftly dealt with. Innocent men and women were imprisoned on false charges, their properties seized, and their families left destitute. The sheriff's power was absolute, and he ruled with an iron fist, crushing any who dared to defy him. Under the sheriff's rule, the people of Nottingham suffered greatly. The once thriving village was now a shadow of its former self, its streets filled with the hungry, the sick, and the destitute. Families who had once lived in relative comfort were now struggling to survive, forced to sell their possessions and even their homes just to pay the crippling taxes imposed by the sheriff. The villagers' suffering was not limited to financial hardship. The sheriff's enforcers were notorious for their cruelty, often taking pleasure in tormenting those who were unable to pay. Those who resisted were beaten, publicly humiliated, or worse. The people lived in constant fear, not knowing when the next round of taxes or the next act of violence would come. In the coal mines across the river, the situation was even more dire. The sheriff had forced many of the displaced villagers to work in these mines, where conditions were brutal and life expectancy was short. Men, women, and even children toiled away in the darkness, their bodies broken by the relentless labor. The air was thick with coal dust, making it difficult to breathe, and many succumbed to the harsh conditions. Despite the suffering, there was little hope of escape. The sheriff's influence extended far and wide, and those who attempted to flee or resist were hunted down and made examples of. The people of Nottingham were trapped in a nightmare, with no end in sight. Robin's land had once been a place of beauty and prosperity, a symbol of his family's legacy and the pride of Nottingham. But in his absence, the sheriff had seized it for himself, using the pretext of Robin's supposed death in the Crusades. The estate, once filled with life and laughter, was now a desolate wasteland, its fields left to wither and die. The sheriff had stripped the estate of everything valuable, selling off livestock, crops, and even the furniture from Robin's manor. What couldn't be sold was left to rot, a testament to the sheriff's greed and disregard for the land's history. The once thriving estate was now little more than a ruin, a stark contrast to the wealth and power it had once represented. The villagers who had worked the land, loyal to Robin and his family for generations, were either forced into servitude or driven from their homes. Those who resisted were dealt with harshly, their families torn apart, and their livelihoods destroyed. The sheriff showed no mercy in his quest to consolidate power, and Robin's land became yet another casualty of his insatiable ambition. Robin's return to Nottingham had been met with the devastating realization that everything he had once held dear had been taken from him. The sheriff's tyranny had not only robbed him of his home and his wealth, but had also brought untold suffering to the people he had sworn to protect. But Robin was not a man to be easily defeated. The loss of his land, the suffering of his people, and the betrayal by those in power only served to fuel his resolve. He had returned to Nottingham not just to reclaim what was rightfully his, but to end the sheriff's reign of terror once and for all. The sheriff's tyranny would not go unchallenged. Robin of Loxley had returned, and with him came the hope of justice for the people of Nottingham. After learning of the sheriff's oppressive rule and the plight of the people of Nottingham, Robin knew he had to see for himself the extent of the suffering. Friar Tuck had mentioned a coal mine town across the river, known as the Slags, where many of the displaced villagers had been forced to work. Determined to uncover the truth, Robin set out for the slags, disguising himself as a commoner to avoid detection. As Robin approached the town, the air grew thick with soot and the stench of coal. The once fertile land surrounding Nottingham had been transformed into a barren wasteland, scarred by the relentless mining operations. The sound of pickaxes striking stone echoed through the air, accompanied by the occasional cough of a worker, their lungs choked with coal dust. The town itself was a bleak and dismal place. Ramshackle huts, hastily constructed from scrap wood and metal, lined the muddy streets. The few shops that existed were little more than stalls, selling meager rations at exorbitant prices. The people of the slags were gaunt and hollow-eyed, their bodies weakened by malnutrition and the grueling labor they endured each day. Robin's heart ached as he witnessed the conditions in which the villagers were forced to live. Children, no older than 10 or 12, worked alongside their parents in the mines, their small hands calloused and blackened by the coal. The elderly, who should have been enjoying their twilight years in peace, were instead burdened with the same backbreaking work, their bodies bent and broken by the strain. Robin moved cautiously through the town, taking in every detail. He could see the fear in the eyes of the people, the way they avoided meeting his gaze, as if even acknowledging a stranger could bring them trouble. The sheriff's enforcers were everywhere, watching over the miners with a cruel and calculating gaze. It was clear that any attempt to resist would be met with swift and brutal punishment. As Robin wandered through the slags, he overheard a group of men speaking in hushed tones near a dilapidated tavern. Curious, he moved closer, carefully positioning himself behind a stack of crates to listen in on their conversation. The men, all miners by the look of them, were discussing their plans to resist the sheriff's rule. Their voices were filled with anger and frustration, but also a deep-seated fear. They spoke of the unbearable conditions in the mines, of the friends and family members they had lost to the brutal work, and of the seemingly hopeless future that awaited them. One of the men, a burly figure with a scar running down the side of his face, slammed his fist on the table. "We can't keep living like this," he growled. "If we don't do something soon, we'll all be dead before the year is out." Another man, thinner and more cautious, shook his head. "And what would you have us do? The sheriff's got an army at his back. We're just a bunch of miners. We go up against him, and we'll be slaughtered." The burly man narrowed his eyes. "We're not alone. There are others, in Nottingham and beyond, who are fed up with the sheriff's tyranny. We just need to find a way to join forces, to organize. If we stand together, we might just have a chance." The conversation continued, with the men debating the merits and risks of rebellion. Robin listened intently, his mind racing. These were the very people he had sworn to protect, and now they were desperate enough to consider an uprising against the sheriff. But they lacked leadership, direction, and most importantly, hope. Just as Robin was about to reveal himself, a familiar voice cut through the air, stopping him in his tracks. "The sheriff's days are numbered. But we must be smart about this. We can't afford to rush in blindly. We need a plan, and we need allies." Robin's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the voice. It was Marian. Robin peered around the crates, his heart pounding in his chest as he saw Marian step into the dim light of the tavern. She was dressed in simple clothing, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes burned with determination. She spoke with a confidence and authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. The men listened intently as Marian outlined her strategy. She spoke of gathering intelligence, of reaching out to other towns and villages to build a network of resistance. She emphasized the importance of secrecy, of striking at the sheriff's forces where they were weakest, and of rallying the people to their cause when the time was right. Robin was both proud and pained as he watched her. Proud of her courage, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to justice. But pained by the knowledge that she had been forced to take on this burden alone, believing him to be dead. Marian's involvement with the rebels made her a target, and Robin knew that the sheriff would not hesitate to crush her if he discovered her activities. The thought of losing her, after everything they had already been through, was unbearable. As the meeting came to a close, Marian gave the men their assignments, urging them to be careful and to trust no one outside their circle. The men nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. Before dispersing into the night, Robin knew he couldn't reveal himself to Marian just yet. It was too dangerous, for both of them. But seeing her, hearing her voice, had reignited the fire within him. He would fight for Nottingham, for the people, and for Marian. The sheriff had taken everything from him, but he would not take Marian, nor the hope she inspired in the oppressed. Robin retreated into the shadows, his mind racing with plans of his own. He would find a way to join forces with the rebels, to support them in their fight against the sheriff. But first, he needed to learn more, to understand the full extent of the sheriff's power and the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The slags had shown Robin the depths of the sheriff's cruelty, but it had also shown him something else: hope. As long as there were people willing to stand up against tyranny, the fight was not lost. And Robin of Loxley would be at the forefront of that fight, for his land, his people, and the woman he loved. As Robin continued his investigation of the slags and the suffering in Nottingham, he became more determined to find a way to undermine the sheriff and restore justice. His thoughts often returned to the boy he had tried to save during the Crusades, and the guilt he carried weighed heavily on him. Little did he know that this memory would soon lead him to a new ally. One evening, as Robin was making his way back from the slags, he noticed a figure following him through the narrow, darkened streets of Nottingham. Instinctively, Robin slipped into the shadows, ready to confront his pursuer. But as the figure drew closer, Robin recognized him. It was the Arab man from the Crusades, the one whose son had been executed by Guy of Gisborne. The man stepped into the dim light of a flickering torch, his eyes meeting Robin's with a mix of sorrow and determination. "You spared me once, and now I have come to repay the debt," the man said in a thick, accented voice. "My name is Yahya, but you may call me John." Robin was taken aback, both by the man's sudden appearance and by the realization that this was the father of the boy he had tried to save. "Yahya," Robin repeated, nodding in recognition. "I am sorry for what happened to your son. I tried to stop it, but I failed." Yahya shook his head. "There is no need for apologies. What's done is done. But I see in you a man who still seeks justice, a man who is not content to let the powerful oppress the weak. That is why I have come to find you." Curiosity piqued, Robin motioned for Yahya to follow him to a more secluded spot, away from prying eyes. They found a quiet alleyway, where they could speak freely without fear of being overheard. As they settled into the shadows, Yahya began to share his story. He had been a scholar in his homeland, respected for his knowledge of science and medicine. But when the Crusaders arrived, everything he held dear was taken from him: his home, his family, and ultimately, his son. I fought against the Crusaders not because of their religion, but because of the injustice they brought to my people, Yahya explained. When my son was taken, I wanted nothing more than to kill every man responsible. But after you tried to save him, I realized that not all of you are the same. Some of you still have honor, even in the midst of war. Yahya had followed Robin back to England, not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a sense of purpose. He had seen firsthand the horrors of war and the corruption that fueled it. Now, in Nottingham, he saw the same patterns of greed and tyranny that had destroyed his homeland. The sheriff, the cardinal, the lords, they are all the same as the men who brought war to my people, Yahya continued, his voice filled with quiet intensity. They use their power to exploit the weak, to take what does not belong to them. But power is not invincible. It has weaknesses, and those weaknesses can be exploited. Robin listened intently, understanding that Yahya was offering more than just words. He was offering a partnership, a chance to strike back at the forces that had wronged them both. Yahya leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. The sheriff and the cardinal are using the people's wealth to fund the war. Every coin they take from the villagers, every ounce of gold they steal from the land, it all goes to the church and the crown, to buy more weapons, more soldiers, more death. Robin nodded. He had seen the evidence of this in the suffering of the people, in the empty coffers of his own estate. But knowing where the money was going and stopping it were two different things. What are you proposing? Robin asked, intrigued by the direction the conversation was taking. Yahya's eyes gleamed with a determined light. We take the money back. We steal it from the sheriff, from the cardinal, from anyone who profits from this war. And we use it to fund the rebellion, to arm the people, to give them a fighting chance. Robin considered the plan. It was bold, dangerous, and if they were caught, it would mean certain death. But it was also exactly the kind of action they needed to take if they were going to stop the sheriff and his allies from bleeding Nottingham dry. How do we do it? Robin asked, the resolve in his voice matching Yahya's. Yahya smiled, sensing Robin's commitment. I have contacts in the underworld, men who know how to move money without being seen. We will identify the shipments, the secret stashes, the hidden vaults where the sheriff keeps his wealth. And then, we will strike. Swiftly, precisely, and without mercy. Robin's mind raced with possibilities. This was not just a plan to rob the rich, it was a plan to cripple the very foundations of the sheriff's power. By taking away his wealth, they could weaken his grip on Nottingham and give the people a chance to fight back. There's more, Yahya added, his tone becoming more urgent. The war effort is not just about money. The cardinal is planning something big, something that could tip the balance of power in their favor. We need to find out what it is and stop it before it's too late. Robin felt a surge of determination. He had come back to Nottingham seeking justice, but now he saw that his mission was even greater. With Yahya's help, they could do more than just reclaim his land. They could bring down the entire corrupt system that had oppressed the people for so long. Then we do it, Robin said firmly. We take back what's ours, and we stop the sheriff, the cardinal, and anyone else who stands in our way. Yahya nodded, a look of fierce satisfaction on his face. For your people, and for mine. Together, Robin and Yahya began to lay the groundwork for their daring plan. They knew the risks were great, but the stakes were even greater. If they succeeded, they could change the course of history, not just for Nottingham, but for all who suffered under the yoke of tyranny. With their plans set in motion, Robin and Yahya wasted no time preparing for their first mission. The target was a heavily guarded shipment of gold being transported from Nottingham Castle to a remote location where it would be sent off to fund the Crusades. The mission was high risk, but the potential reward was enormous. Successfully intercepting the shipment would not only strike a blow against the sheriff but also provide the funds needed to arm and rally the oppressed people of Nottingham. The night of the mission was cold and moonless, perfect for the kind of stealth operation they had planned. Dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, Robin and Yahya moved through the shadowy streets of Nottingham with practiced ease. Yahya, with his extensive knowledge of tactics and strategy, had mapped out the route the shipment would take, noting every potential obstacle and escape route. As they approached the designated ambush point, a narrow, secluded road just outside the city walls, Robin felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before a fight. This time, however, it was different. He wasn't fighting for a king or a distant cause, he was fighting for his people, for justice, and for the chance to right the wrongs that had been done to them. Yahya, ever the strategist, quickly assessed the situation. The shipment was escorted by a dozen guards, all well armed and alert. But Yahya had anticipated this and had a plan in place. He handed Robin a small, handmade signal flare. When the time comes, light this, Yahya instructed. It will draw their attention away from the road, giving us the opportunity we need. Robin nodded, slipping the flare into his belt as he readied his bow. From their vantage point hidden in the underbrush, they watched as the convoy approached. The moment the guards were close enough, Robin set the flare alight and hurled it into a nearby grove of trees. The flare ignited with a brilliant flash, followed by a crackling sound that resembled the start of a fire. As Yahya predicted, the guards immediately turned their attention toward the perceived threat. Panic spread among them as they debated whether to continue guarding the gold or investigate the potential fire. In the confusion, Robin and Yahya made their move. Robin's arrows flew silently through the night, taking down two of the guards before they even realized they were under attack. Yahya, quick and deadly with his blade, dispatched another as they closed in on the cart carrying the gold. The remaining guards, now aware of the ambush, scrambled to defend the shipment. But they were no match for the combined skills of Robin and Yahya. Robin's precision with the bow and Yahya's swift, calculated strikes left the guards incapacitated or fleeing for their lives. With the guards dealt with, Robin and Yahya quickly loaded the gold onto a pair of horses they had hidden nearby. It was a small fortune, enough to make a significant impact on the rebellion. As they secured the last of the chests, Yahya turned to Robin with a rare smile. "This is just the beginning," he said, the success of the first mission spread quickly among the people of Nottingham. Tales of a mysterious thief who had outwitted the sheriff's men and stolen a fortune to aid the poor began to circulate, whispered in the dark corners of taverns and in the homes of those who had been wronged by the sheriff's greed. But Robin and Yahya were not content with just one victory. They continued to strike at the sheriff's wealth, targeting tax collectors, corrupt officials, and any others who profited from the exploitation of the people. Each raid was meticulously planned and executed, with the stolen wealth quietly redistributed to those who needed it most. The rebellion, once a mere spark of hope, began to gain momentum. The people, inspired by these acts of defiance, started to organize themselves, quietly preparing for the day when they could rise against the sheriff and his allies. Weapons were smuggled into the city, hidden in secret caches known only to those involved in the rebellion. Messages were passed through a network of trusted individuals, coordinating efforts across Nottingham and beyond. Robin's transformation from a disillusioned nobleman to a folk hero was complete. He had become more than just a man, he was a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope for the oppressed. And with each successful raid, his legend grew. As the weeks passed, the name Robin Hood began to spread across Nottinghamshire and beyond. The people, who had once felt powerless in the face of the sheriff's tyranny, now had someone to rally behind. Songs were sung in his honor, and children played games pretending to be the daring outlaw who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. The sheriff, infuriated by the losses and the growing unrest among the populace, doubled his efforts to capture the elusive thief. He sent out patrols, increased the number of guards in the city, and offered a substantial reward for anyone who could bring Robin Hood to justice. But no matter how hard the sheriff tried, Robin and his growing band of followers always seemed to be one step ahead. Robin's life was now one of constant danger and uncertainty, but he embraced it with a newfound sense of purpose. With Yahya at his side, and the support of the people behind him, he was determined to bring down the sheriff and restore justice to Nottingham. The legend of Robin Hood, the thief of Nottingham, was born out of the ashes of war and tyranny. It was a legend that would inspire generations to come, a story of courage, defiance, and the unyielding fight for what was right. And though Robin knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, he was ready to face it head-on. For he was no longer just Robin of Loxley, he was Robin Hood, the outlaw who would stop at nothing to protect his people and bring justice to the land. Life in Nottingham had become increasingly difficult for Marian. The once vibrant city had turned into a place of despair and suffering under the sheriff's oppressive rule. Every day, she saw the toll it took on the people she cared about, and it broke her heart. Yet she found solace and purpose in aiding the rebellion, led by the passionate and determined Will Tillman. Will had been her closest ally since Robin's departure to fight in the Crusades. They shared the same desire to bring down the sheriff and free Nottingham from his tyrannical grip. Over time, their shared cause brought them closer, and Marian found herself developing feelings for Will, even as she still mourned Robin's loss. But then, everything changed. Whispered rumors began circulating in the slags and throughout Nottingham that a mysterious outlaw had returned, a man who stole from the rich to give to the poor, a man who had evaded the sheriff's grasp time and again. As the rumors grew, so did Marian's suspicions, especially when she heard the name that was being spoken with reverence and awe, Robin Hood. At first, she refused to believe it. Robin had been gone for years, and the sheriff had declared him dead. But the more she heard about the daring exploits of this outlaw, the more she began to wonder if Robin had somehow survived and returned to Nottingham Point one evening, as Marian sat with Will, discussing the latest plans for the rebellion. She could no longer keep her thoughts to herself. "Will, have you heard the rumors?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Will looked up, his expression serious. "Everyone's talking about him, the so-called Robin Hood. They say he's a master thief, stealing from the sheriff's men and giving the gold to the poor. But we don't know who he really is." Marian hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. What if it really is Robin? What if he's come back? Will's expression darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Marian, Robin is dead. The sheriff made sure of that. Whoever this Robin Hood is, he's just another outlaw trying to make a name for himself. We can't afford to be distracted by rumors. We need to focus on the rebellion." Marian nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. She wanted to believe Will, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man they were hearing about was indeed Robin, the man she had once loved. As the days passed, Marian found herself torn between two worlds. On one hand, there was Will, the man who had stood by her through thick and thin, who shared her dream of a free Nottingham. On the other hand, there was Robin, the man who had once been her everything, the man she had believed lost forever. Her heart was in turmoil. If Robin had truly returned, what did that mean for her relationship with Will? Could she still fight alongside Will while knowing that Robin was out there, risking his life for the same cause? And if she did find Robin, what would she say to him? How could she explain her feelings for Will? The more she thought about it, the more conflicted she became. Marian knew she couldn't ignore the situation any longer. She had to know the truth, even if it meant facing the possibility that Robin had changed, that he was no longer the man she remembered. But Will's warnings echoed in her mind. He was right, they couldn't afford distractions. The rebellion needed her focus, her commitment. If she went after Robin, would she be betraying Will and everything they had worked for? Or would finding Robin only strengthen their cause? Marian felt as though she was being pulled in two different directions. Her loyalty to Will and the rebellion was strong, but her love for Robin had never truly faded. The thought of seeing him again filled her with both hope and fear. Finally, she made up her mind. She had to confront Robin, to see for herself whether the man behind the legend was truly the Robin she had loved. Only then could she make a decision about where her loyalties truly lay. One night, after making sure Will was occupied with other matters, Marian set out to find Robin. She had heard whispers of his latest exploits, and she had a good idea of where he might be hiding. With her cloak pulled tightly around her, she made her way through the darkened streets of Nottingham, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. It didn't take long for her to find the trail of rumors leading to a hidden camp deep within Sherwood Forest, a place where the outlaw Robin Hood was said to gather his allies and plan his next move against the sheriff. As she approached the outskirts of the forest, the trees loomed like silent sentinels, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. Marian hesitated at the edge of the forest, her mind racing with questions. What if Robin didn't want to see her? What if he had moved on, forgotten her. But she couldn't turn back now. She had come too far, and she needed answers. With steely resolve, Marian pressed on, navigating the dense undergrowth until she reached a clearing. There, she saw him, Robin, standing near a small fire, his back turned to her as he spoke with a man she recognized as Yahya. For a moment, Marian's breath caught in her throat. He looked so different, yet so familiar. The years had changed him, hardened him, but there was no mistaking the way he carried himself, the way he stood with quiet confidence. Gathering her courage, Marian stepped forward. "Robin," she called out, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. Robin froze, his conversation with Yahya abruptly halted. Slowly, he turned to face her, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized the woman standing before him. Marian. The world seemed to stand still as they stared at each other, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them. Marian took a deep breath, knowing that the next words she spoke would change everything. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice firm. "Why did you come back? And where do we go from here?" Robin's gaze softened, and he took a step toward her, his expression a mix of sorrow and determination. "I came back for Nottingham, for the people who need me. But I never stopped thinking about you, Marian. Not for a single day." Tears welled in Marian's eyes, but she blinked them away. This was not the time for tears, this was a time for decisions. "Things have changed, Robin. I've changed. We're fighting a war here, and I need to know where you stand." Robin nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I stand with the people, against the sheriff and everything he represents. But more than that, I stand with you, Marian, if you'll have me." Marian's heart ached with the choice before her. She knew she had to make a decision, one that would determine not only her future but the future of the rebellion. Would she stay loyal to Will and the cause they had built together, or would she follow her heart back to Robin, the man who had once been her whole world? Taking a deep breath, Marian made her choice, knowing that whatever path she chose, there would be no turning back. With each successful heist, the legend of Robin Hood began to spread like wildfire through Nottingham and beyond. Robin and Yahya had quickly become a formidable team, their partnership built on mutual respect and a shared goal of ending the sheriff's oppressive rule. The gold they stole from the rich was discreetly distributed to the poor, and for the first time in years, the people of Nottingham had a glimmer of hope. Robin's return had reignited a spark of resistance among the commoners, and more people were eager to join the cause. The sheriff's men were growing increasingly frustrated as they tried, and failed, to catch the elusive outlaw. Every time they thought they had a lead, Robin and Yahya would slip through their fingers, leaving them humiliated and empty-handed. But Robin knew that if they were to truly make an impact, they needed more than just daring raids. They needed to build something lasting, an underground network that could gather information, coordinate efforts, and rally the people to their cause. It was time to take their fight against the sheriff to the next level. The idea of an underground network had been brewing in Robin's mind for some time. He knew that information was power, and if they could establish a network of informants throughout Nottingham, they would be able to stay one step ahead of the sheriff and his men. With Yahya's help, Robin began reaching out to those who were trusted by the people but who operated under the radar: merchants, innkeepers, and even some of the sheriff's own servants who had grown weary of the cruelty they witnessed daily. These individuals were not fighters, but they had access to valuable information and were willing to help in whatever way they could. Yahya's strategic mind proved invaluable as they began to establish secret communication channels and safe houses throughout the city and the surrounding countryside. Messages were passed through coded language, hidden in plain sight within ordinary transactions, or delivered by children who could move unnoticed through the streets. Robin also reached out to the leaders of various guilds and trades, knowing that these groups held sway over large portions of the population. If they could gain the trust and support of the guilds, their network would grow exponentially. Slowly but surely, their network began to take shape. They now had eyes and ears in places Robin had never dreamed of reaching before, within the sheriff's own fortress, in the bustling marketplaces, and even in the quietest corners of the slags. The people of Nottingham were beginning to see Robin Hood not just as a hero, but as a symbol of resistance, and they were eager to do their part. While the underground network was vital, Robin knew that gaining the trust of the commoners was just as important. Without their support, the rebellion would falter, and all their efforts would be in vain. He and Yahya made it a priority to connect with the people on a personal level, showing them that they were not alone in their struggles. Robin made frequent trips to the slags, speaking directly with the miners and their families, listening to their concerns, and offering what help he could. He and Yahya distributed food and supplies to those who needed them most, all while keeping their identities hidden from the sheriff's spies. The people were initially cautious, but Robin's actions spoke louder than words. They saw how he risked his life for them, how he stood up against the sheriff's tyranny, and how he always put the needs of others before his own. Slowly, the barriers of distrust began to crumble, and the commoners began to open up to him. Marian also played a crucial role in building this trust. Her involvement in the rebellion gave her a unique position within the community. She was able to vouch for Robin's intentions, easing the doubts of those who still feared the consequences of standing up to the sheriff. As the days passed, the underground network grew stronger, and the bond between Robin, Yahya, Marian, and the people of Nottingham deepened. What had started as a desperate bid to survive had now become a full-fledged movement. With Robin Hood at its helm, the sheriff and his men could sense that something was brewing, but they had no idea how vast and well-organized the network had become. They underestimated the resolve of the people, the strength of their will, and the lengths to which Robin Hood would go to see justice served. In the shadows of Nottingham, the rebellion was taking root, and the stage was being set for the greatest battle of all, a battle for the heart and soul of the city. And as Robin and Yahya prepared for what lay ahead, they knew that the underground network they had built would be the key to their victory. The Sheriff of Nottingham was no fool. Though he had declared Robin of Loxley dead years ago, he knew better than to ignore the growing legend of Robin Hood, a name that was now whispered in every corner of Nottingham, from the grand halls of the wealthy to the darkest alleys of the slags. The bold thefts, the sudden surge of hope among the commoners, and the rumors of a new leader rising from the ashes of despair all pointed to one thing: Robin Hood was not just a myth. As reports of stolen gold, disrupted shipments, and vanished tax collections piled up on his desk, the sheriff's suspicions grew. He was certain that someone, perhaps even Robin of Loxley himself, was behind these audacious acts. But who could it be? The sheriff had men everywhere, yet this mysterious outlaw remained elusive, always slipping through their fingers like a shadow. The sheriff called upon his most trusted advisor, Guy of Gisborne, to discuss the situation. "This Robin Hood is a thorn in our side," the sheriff growled, his voice laced with frustration. "Every theft, every act of defiance weakens our grip on this city. I need to know who he is, and I need him stopped, permanently." Gisborne, ever loyal and ruthless, nodded in agreement. "I will double the patrols, question every man, woman, and child if I have to. We'll find this outlaw, my lord, and when we do, we'll make an example of him that the people will never forget." But the sheriff was not so easily satisfied. He knew that brute force alone wouldn't be enough. If Robin Hood was indeed Robin of Loxley, then he was no ordinary criminal. He was a man of strategy, someone who understood the game of power and influence. The sheriff needed to outsmart him, to lure him out of the shadows and into a trap from which there would be no escape. Determined to flush out the outlaw and crush any hopes of rebellion, the sheriff initiated a brutal crackdown on the citizens of Nottingham. He ordered his soldiers to raid homes, arresting anyone suspected of aiding Robin Hood or the rebels. Entire families were dragged from their beds in the dead of night, their homes ransacked, their possessions seized, and their loved ones taken away in chains. The sheriff's men patrolled the streets day and night, their eyes and ears open for any sign of dissent. Curfews were imposed, gatherings were forbidden, and anyone caught spreading rumors about Robin Hood faced severe punishment. The atmosphere in Nottingham grew tense, the people living in constant fear of the next knock on their door. To make matters worse, the sheriff raised taxes even higher, demanding more gold from the already struggling citizens. He claimed it was to fund the continued war effort, but the people knew the truth. This was a punishment, a show of power meant to break their spirits and force them into submission. Despite the danger, the underground network that Robin and Yahya had established continued to operate in secret, providing aid to those affected by the crackdown. But even they knew that the situation was becoming increasingly dire. The sheriff's ruthless tactics were pushing the people to their breaking point, and the once hopeful murmurs of rebellion were now tinged with fear and desperation. As the sheriff's crackdown intensified, so too did the violence. His men began to use more extreme measures to root out suspected rebels, resorting to torture and public executions to instill fear. The gallows in the town square became a grim reminder of the cost of defiance, as more and more citizens were hanged for crimes they had not committed. The sheriff took particular pleasure in making an example of those who had once been close to Robin of Loxley. He ordered the arrest of anyone who had ever associated with the former lord, including his old friends and servants. Many were taken to the dungeons beneath Nottingham Castle, where they faced unspeakable horrors at the hands of the sheriff's torturers, but the sheriff's cruelty only served to fuel the flames of rebellion. For every life he took, 10 more rose in defiance. The commoners, though terrified, began to see the sheriff not just as a ruler but as a tyrant who had to be overthrown. The tales of Robin Hood's daring deeds became more than just stories, they became a rallying cry for the oppressed. Robin and Yahya, aware of the escalating violence, knew that they had to act quickly. The time for stealth and careful planning was running out. They needed to strike a decisive blow against the sheriff, one that would turn the tide in their favor and give the people a reason to fight back. As the bloodshed in Nottingham continued, Robin's resolve hardened. He had seen enough death, enough suffering, to know that this fight was no longer just about reclaiming his land or his title. It was about justice, about giving the people of Nottingham a future free from tyranny. The sheriff, in his arrogance, believed that he could crush the rebellion with fear and violence. But he had underestimated the power of the people's will and the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of Nottingham, and neither Robin nor the sheriff was prepared to back down. In the shadows of the city, as the violence reached its peak, Robin Hood and his allies made their final preparations. The sheriff's schemes had pushed them to the brink, but it was in that desperation that they found their greatest strength. The time had come to bring the fight to the sheriff's doorstep, to show him that Nottingham would not bow to his tyranny any longer. As the rebellion against the Sheriff of Nottingham gained momentum, one man stood out among the commoners as a natural leader: Will Tillman. Will had always been a man of the people, charismatic, bold, and fiercely determined to bring about change. His voice resonated with the frustrations and aspirations of the oppressed, and it wasn't long before he became a prominent figure in the fight against the sheriff's tyranny. Under Will's leadership, the commoners grew more organized and daring in their resistance. He was instrumental in rallying the people of the Slags and other outlying villages, inspiring them to join the cause. His passionate speeches ignited a fire in the hearts of those who had long since given up hope, and they began to see Will as the man who could lead them to victory. As Will's influence grew, so did his ambition. He saw the rebellion not just as a fight for justice but as an opportunity to reshape Nottingham in his image, a city where the commoners, not the nobility, held power. His vision was one of equality and fairness, where the people's voices would be heard, and the corrupt ruling class would be held accountable. But with power came challenges. Will was acutely aware of the growing legend of Robin Hood, the mysterious outlaw who had suddenly appeared and was stealing from the rich to give to the poor. The people were beginning to look to Robin as a hero, and Will couldn't help but feel threatened by this new figure who was quickly gaining their admiration. Will's feelings towards Robin Hood were complex. On one hand, he admired the outlaw's courage and the impact he was having on the rebellion. Robin's daring thefts had provided much-needed resources for the commoners and had humiliated the sheriff in ways Will could only dream of. But on the other hand, Robin's sudden rise to prominence threatened Will's own position as a leader. As stories of Robin Hood's exploits spread, Will began to notice a shift in the people's loyalty. They spoke of Robin with reverence, celebrating his every victory and eagerly awaiting the next. Will, who had worked tirelessly to build the rebellion, now found himself overshadowed by a man who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. This rivalry, though unspoken, began to fester within Will. He couldn't deny the impact Robin was having, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that the outlaw was stealing his thunder. Will's ambition drove him to seek more power, to prove that he was the rightful leader of the rebellion, not some nobleman with a hero's complex. The tension between Will and Robin grew with each passing day. While they both shared the same goal of overthrowing the sheriff, their methods and motivations were different. Robin's focus was on justice and reclaiming what had been taken from him, while Will was driven by a desire to create a new order, one where the people held the power. their rivalry began to manifest in subtle ways: disagreements over strategy, conflicting priorities, and a growing sense of competition. The commoners, sensing the tension between their two leaders, were torn between their loyalty to Will and their admiration for Robin. This division threatened to weaken the rebellion at a time when unity was most crucial. Complicating matters further was Marian, who found herself caught between the two men. Marian had been a key figure in the rebellion long before Robin's return, working closely with Will to help the commoners and coordinate their efforts. Over time, she and Will had developed a close bond, one built on mutual respect and a shared passion for justice, but everything changed when Robin returned. Marian's love for Robin had never waned, even during his years away at the Crusades. Seeing him alive and fighting for the people rekindled old feelings, and she was torn between her loyalty to Will and her love for Robin. Will, who had always admired Marian, couldn't help but notice the change in her after Robin's return. He saw the way she looked at Robin, the way she spoke of him with a mix of admiration and concern. It was clear to Will that Marian's heart still belonged to Robin, and this realization fueled his growing resentment. The tension between Will and Marian began to strain their working relationship. What had once been a strong partnership now felt fraught with unspoken emotions and unresolved conflicts. Marian tried to balance her duties to the rebellion with her feelings for Robin, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Will, for his part, struggled with his feelings towards Marian. He respected her as a leader and valued her contributions to the cause, but he couldn't ignore the jealousy and frustration that gnawed at him every time he saw her with Robin. He knew that Marian's loyalty was wavering, and he feared that if she chose Robin over him, it could further divide the rebellion. As the rebellion reached a critical point, the personal conflicts between Will, Robin, and Marian threatened to undermine everything they had worked for. The tension between them was palpable, and it was only a matter of time before it came to a head. Will's ambition, Robin's resolve, and Marian's torn heart were on a collision course, and the outcome would have far-reaching consequences for the future of Nottingham. The tension in Nottingham reached new heights with the arrival of a powerful and corrupt figure, the Cardinal. Sent by the Church to oversee the continued funding of the Crusades, the Cardinal was a man of immense influence, feared and revered in equal measure. His arrival signaled that the Church was fully invested in maintaining its grip on power, using any means necessary to ensure the flow of wealth and resources from Nottingham to the Crusades. The citizens of Nottingham, already suffering under the sheriff's oppressive rule, watched with a mixture of dread and anger as the Cardinal's grand procession entered the city. His arrival was marked by a display of wealth and power, gilded carriages, armed guards, and lavish robes that only highlighted the stark contrast between the opulence of the ruling class and the poverty of the commoners. The sheriff, eager to prove his loyalty and competence, welcomed the Cardinal with open arms, arranging a grand banquet in his honor. He knew that the Cardinal's favor was crucial for maintaining his position and ensuring that the Church's coffers continued to be filled. But the sheriff also knew that the Cardinal's presence would bring additional scrutiny and pressure to deliver results, particularly in crushing the growing rebellion. As the Cardinal settled into Nottingham Castle, his reputation as a ruthless enforcer of the churches will quickly spread among the people. Stories of his previous exploits, where he had crushed uprisings, excommunicated those who opposed him, and seized lands for the Church, sent a wave of fear through the city. The people knew that the cardinal's visit would only mean more suffering and hardship for them. The cardinal wasted no time in making his intentions clear. During private meetings with the sheriff and his advisors, he laid out a series of plans to fortify the sheriff's rule and ensure the continued extraction of wealth from Nottingham. The cardinal's strategies were brutal but effective, designed to break the spirit of the people and eliminate any threat to the church's interests. First, the cardinal ordered an increase in taxes, demanding even more gold from the already impoverished citizens. He justified this by claiming that the war effort required additional funds and that it was the duty of every loyal subject to support the Crusades. The sheriff, though concerned about the potential backlash, had no choice but to comply, knowing that disobedience would mean his own downfall. Next, the cardinal proposed a series of public punishments to serve as a deterrent to the rebellion. He suggested that the most vocal and influential members of the resistance be rounded up and executed in the town square, their deaths serving as a stark warning to anyone who dared to defy the church and the sheriff's rule. The sheriff, eager to regain control, agreed to the plan, ordering his men to begin the arrests, but the cardinal's most insidious plan involved turning the people against Robin Hood and the rebellion. He devised a campaign of misinformation, spreading rumors that Robin Hood was not a hero of the people but a traitor who sought to enrich himself at their expense. The cardinal planned to use the church's influence to convince the citizens that their suffering was the result of Robin Hood's actions, not the greed and corruption of the ruling class. As the cardinal's plans were set in motion, the situation in Nottingham grew even more dire. The people, already burdened by high taxes and constant oppression, now faced the threat of public executions and the insidious lies spread by the church. The cardinal's presence had turned Nottingham into a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Robin Hood, always vigilant, quickly learned of the cardinal's arrival and the new dangers it posed to the rebellion. Through his network of informants, he became aware of the cardinal's plans to tighten the sheriff's grip on Nottingham and crush the spirit of the commoners. Robin knew that if the cardinal's influence was not stopped, the rebellion would be doomed, and the people's suffering would only deepen. Robin and Yahya began to strategize, understanding that the cardinal represented a new and formidable enemy. They knew that they had to strike quickly and decisively, before the cardinal could fully implement his plans. But this would not be like their previous missions. This time, they were up against a man who held immense power, both politically and spiritually. Robin's decision was clear: the cardinal had to be their new target. But how could they strike at such a powerful figure without endangering the entire rebellion? The cardinal was heavily guarded, and any attempt on his life would provoke a brutal retaliation from both the sheriff and the church. Yahya proposed a bold plan. Instead of targeting the cardinal directly, they would undermine his authority by exposing his corruption to the people. If they could reveal the cardinal's true nature, his greed, his cruelty, and his exploitation of the commoners, then the people might turn against him and, by extension, the sheriff. This would weaken the church's influence and strengthen the rebellion. Robin agreed, recognizing the wisdom in Yahya's plan. They would need to gather evidence of the cardinal's corruption distributed among the people, showing them that the man who claimed to serve God was, in fact, a servant of his own greed. It would be a dangerous mission, but Robin was determined to see it through. As they prepared for their next move, Robin and Yahya knew that this mission would be unlike any they had undertaken before. The cardinal was no ordinary opponent, and their success or failure would determine the fate of Nottingham. The stakes had never been higher, but Robin was ready to face the challenge, knowing that the future of the people he fought for depended on it. Robin Hood, the once carefree Lord of Loxley, now found himself burdened by the weight of his secret life and the responsibilities it carried. His return to Nottingham had been far from the joyous homecoming he had envisioned. Instead, it was a constant battle against the forces of tyranny. With every daring heist, every act of defiance against the sheriff and the corrupt church, Robin felt the gap widening between the man he had become and the man he once was. Yet, amid all the chaos and danger, it was Marian who weighed most heavily on his mind. The love they had shared before he was sent to the Crusades had been a beacon of hope for him during the darkest times. But now, everything had changed. Marian was involved with the rebellion, but she was also closely tied to Will Tillman, the ambitious leader who viewed Robin as both an ally and a rival. Robin's heart ached with the knowledge that Marian believed him dead for so long, only to discover he had returned under a shroud of secrecy. He longed to tell her the truth, to share his plans with her, and to fight by her side. But the risks were immense. If Marian knew of his involvement with Yahya and their plans to undermine the cardinal and the sheriff, she could be put in grave danger. And if Will discovered the full extent of Robin's intentions, it could fracture the rebellion at a critical moment. The internal struggle was tearing Robin apart. Every day he delayed, the danger grew. But every day he kept silent, the distance between him and Marian seemed to widen. He knew he had to make a decision soon, one that could either bring them closer together or drive them apart forever. As the tension within him reached a breaking point, Robin finally made up his mind. He could no longer keep Marian in the dark, no matter the consequences. She deserved to know the truth, not just about his survival but about everything he had been doing since his return. Robin knew that he could not continue to deceive her, especially when her life and the lives of so many others were at stake. That evening, Robin arranged to meet Marian in the woods, away from the prying eyes of Will, the sheriff's spies, and the ever-watchful cardinal. The woods, once a place of solace and tranquility for them, had become a sanctuary from the oppressive rule of Nottingham. Here, among the trees and the moonlight, Robin hoped to find the courage to reveal his true self to Marian. As he waited for her to arrive, Robin's mind raced with uncertainty. What if she could not forgive him for keeping so many secrets? What if she chose Will over him? These thoughts gnawed at him, but he knew that honesty was his only option. Marian had always been strong and principled, qualities that Robin admired deeply. He hoped that by sharing his burden, they could find a way to navigate the perilous path ahead together. Marian arrived in the woods, her heart pounding with anticipation and confusion. She had heard whispers of Robin's return but had not yet confronted him directly. Seeing him standing there, alive and seemingly well, brought a rush of emotions: relief, anger, love, and uncertainty all at once. Robin stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. He reached for Marian's hands, holding them gently as he began to speak. "Marian," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "there's so much I need to tell you, and I should have told you sooner. When I returned from the Crusades, I found a city that was not the Nottingham I once knew. The sheriff's tyranny, the church's corruption, the suffering of our people, it all weighed on me, and I knew I had to act. Marian listened intently, her gaze never leaving his. Robin continued, revealing everything: his partnership with Yahya, their plan to disrupt the war effort, the thefts, and the growing rebellion. He explained his reasons for keeping his identity hidden, his fears of putting her in danger. As the truth spilled out, Marian's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. She had always known that Robin was a man of action, someone who could not stand idly by in the face of injustice. But hearing it from him, seeing the toll it had taken on him, made her realize the depth of his commitment to their cause. "I couldn't bear to see you hurt," Robin admitted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I've lost so much already, my land, my title, but losing you would be unbearable. That's why I kept this from you, but I see now that I was wrong. You deserve to know everything, and I should have trusted you from the start." Marian, moved by Robin's sincerity, stepped closer, her hand squeezing his. "Robin, I understand why you did what you did," she said softly. "But we're in this together now. Whatever happens, we face it side by side. I love you, and I always have, even when I thought you were gone. We can't let fear keep us apart." The night in the woods became a turning point for both of them. In the quiet, moonlit grove, Robin and Marian reaffirmed their love and commitment to each other and the fight ahead. They knew that the road would be dangerous, fraught with challenges and sacrifices, but they were ready to face it together, united by their love and their shared resolve. As they held each other, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Robin's revelation had brought them closer, and now, with Marian by his side, he felt stronger than ever. Together, they would take on the sheriff, the cardinal, and anyone else who stood in their way, knowing that their love and their cause were worth every risk. With the decision to target the cardinal made, Robin and Yahya knew that their next move would be their most perilous yet. The cardinal was not just a figure of religious authority but a man deeply embedded within the corrupt power structure that held Nottingham in its iron grip. Infiltrating his inner circle would require cunning, strategy, and nerves of steel. Yahya, with his extensive knowledge of the Crusades and the politics surrounding the church, devised a plan to get close to the cardinal. Robin, leveraging his noble background and reputation as a former lord, would pose as a disillusioned but still loyal knight who sought to regain favor with the church. The idea was to present themselves as valuable assets to the cardinal, men who could be trusted to aid in fortifying the church's power in Nottingham. The two men donned disguises, Yahya as a mysterious foreign advisor, and Robin as a repentant knight seeking redemption. Their initial approach was cautious, using intermediaries and small gestures to gain the attention of the cardinal's lieutenants. Gradually, they were able to secure an audience with the cardinal, who was intrigued by the potential usefulness of these two unexpected allies. During their meetings, Robin and Yahya fed the cardinal carefully crafted lies, reinforcing his belief that they were committed to the church's cause. They played on his vanity and greed, presenting themselves as eager to assist in crushing the rebellion and securing more wealth for the church. The cardinal, blinded by his own ambitions, welcomed them into his circle, unaware that he was letting the very enemy he sought to destroy into his fold. With their positions within the cardinal's circle secured, Robin and Yahya turned their attention to their true mission: sabotaging the war fund. They knew that the flow of money from Nottingham to the Crusades was the lifeblood of the Church's war effort. By disrupting this, they could strike a significant blow against the cardinal and the sheriff, weakening their grip on power and buying time for the rebellion to gain strength. Yahya's expertise in financial matters and Robin's understanding of the local economy were crucial in executing their plan. They identified key points where the Church's wealth was stored and transported, including secret vaults within Nottingham Castle and heavily guarded caravans that regularly transported gold and valuables to the Church. The first act of sabotage was a calculated heist. Under the cover of darkness, Robin and Yahya led a small team of trusted rebels in infiltrating one of the Church's vaults. They used the knowledge they had gained from their time within the cardinal's circle to bypass security and gain access to the treasure. Instead of taking all the gold, which would have been too obvious, they removed just enough to cause suspicion without immediate alarm. They then redistributed the wealth to the oppressed commoners, further bolstering the rebellion's support. Next, they orchestrated a series of ambushes on the caravans transporting funds to the Church. Using their growing network of informants, they learned the routes and schedules of these caravans. Robin and Yahya led daring raids, carefully planned to minimize casualties while maximizing disruption. The stolen gold was again funneled back into the rebellion, funding weapons, supplies, and propaganda efforts to counter the Church's influence. The sabotage had an immediate impact. The cardinal, enraged by the sudden losses, tightened security, and increased his demands on the sheriff to crack down on the rebellion. But the damage was done, the war fund was bleeding, and the Church's ability to finance its efforts was severely compromised. Meanwhile, the people of Nottingham, heartened by the sudden influx of resources, grew more defiant and supportive of the rebellion. As Robin and Yahya's actions began to weaken the cardinal's hold on Nottingham, they realized that their efforts alone would not be enough to overthrow the oppressive regime. They needed more allies, more resources, and a broader coalition of rebels willing to stand against the combined might of the sheriff and the Church. Word of Robin Hood's exploits spread quickly, reaching other groups of rebels who had been resisting the sheriff's rule in their own ways. These were smaller, scattered factions, bandits, disenfranchised nobles, disgruntled soldiers, and even disillusioned members of the clergy, each with their own grievances but lacking the coordination to pose a significant threat. Recognizing the potential strength in unity, Robin and Yahya began reaching out to these groups, offering them a chance to join forces. Their message was simple: alone, they were weak, but together, they could challenge the sheriff and the cardinal and reclaim Nottingham for the people. The proposal was met with skepticism by some, but many saw the logic in it and admired the success Robin and Yahya had already achieved. Robin and Yahya organized secret meetings in the depths of Sherwood Forest, where representatives from the various factions came together to discuss their shared goals and strategies. These gatherings were tense, with old rivalries and suspicions threatening to derail the fragile alliance. But Robin's charisma and Yahya's diplomatic skills helped to smooth over differences, and gradually, a unified resistance began to take shape. The new alliance brought with it a surge of resources and manpower. The rebels shared their knowledge, weapons, and tactics, creating a more formidable and coordinated force. The combined efforts of these diverse groups also allowed for more ambitious operations, including larger-scale sabotage, targeted attacks on the sheriff's strongholds, and more effective propaganda campaigns to sway the hearts and minds of Nottingham's citizens. As the alliance grew stronger, so did the hope of the people. What had once seemed like a hopeless struggle against an insurmountable enemy was now a full-fledged rebellion, with Robin Hood and Yahya at its heart. The sheriff and the cardinal, once so secure in their power, now faced a growing threat that they could no longer ignore, but with this newfound strength came increased danger. The sheriff and the cardinal were becoming more desperate, and their retaliations were growing more brutal. Robin and Yahya knew that the final confrontation was drawing near, and that their dangerous alliance would be tested in ways they had never imagined. Yet, they pressed on, driven by the belief that justice and freedom were worth any risk. As the rebellion against the corrupt rule of the sheriff and the cardinal gained momentum, the atmosphere in Nottingham shifted from uneasy tension to palpable conflict. The sheriff, sensing the growing threat to his power, called for an immediate and comprehensive mobilization of his forces. The once bustling streets of Nottingham were now filled with the clamor of soldiers preparing for war. The sheriff's strategy was to fortify the city against the anticipated assault. He ordered the construction of additional barricades, reinforced the city gates, and positioned archers and crossbowmen on the walls. His men worked tirelessly, setting up siege engines and stockpiling supplies for what he anticipated would be a prolonged conflict. The cardinal's wealth funded the effort, ensuring that the sheriff had ample resources to sustain a lengthy siege. The sheriff's troops, bolstered by the promise of rewards and the threat of harsh reprisals, were given orders to be vigilant and prepared for a fierce battle. Despite their numbers and the fortified defenses, there was an undercurrent of fear among the troops. Whispers of Robin Hood's daring exploits and the growing strength of the rebel alliance had begun to unsettle even the most seasoned soldiers. On the other side, the commoners of Nottingham, long oppressed and downtrodden, were rising with newfound hope. Under the leadership of Robin Hood and the growing coalition of rebels, they had come together with a shared purpose, to overthrow the tyrannical rule of the sheriff and reclaim their city. The rebels, now a well-organized and determined force, began their final preparations for the assault. Robin Hood, standing before a gathering of his most trusted allies and commoners, delivered a stirring speech that galvanized the masses. He spoke of freedom, justice, and the end of suffering. His words resonated deeply with the people who had endured years of hardship, and they were ready to fight for a better future. Marian, now a key figure in the rebellion, worked tirelessly alongside Robin, rallying the commoners and ensuring that their forces were ready. Her presence inspired many, and her strategic mind helped in organizing the rebels into effective fighting units. As the day of the siege approached, the once fearful and fragmented commoners transformed into a cohesive and determined army, united under Robin's banner. The rebels, armed with weapons, tools, and an unyielding spirit, prepared to lay siege to the very city they had once feared. Their numbers grew, and their resolve strengthened, ready to face the formidable defenses of Nottingham. The night before the planned assault was filled with restless anticipation. The rebels, having gathered outside the city walls, were poised for action. The air was thick with tension as they made final adjustments to their plans and prepared for the forthcoming battle. As dawn broke, the first wave of the rebellion began. Robin and his commanders led their forces in a coordinated attack, targeting key points of the sheriff's defenses. The initial assault was swift and fierce, with rebels launching attacks on the barricades, engaging in skirmishes with the sheriff's troops, and using siege weapons to breach the walls. The commoners, driven by years of suffering and fueled by the hope of liberation, fought with extraordinary bravery. The streets of Nottingham, once symbols of oppression, became the battlegrounds of a fierce conflict. Rebels clashed with the sheriff's soldiers in brutal combat, while others worked to dismantle barricades and breach the city's defenses. Inside the city, the sheriff's forces scrambled to respond. The initial shock of the rebel assault led to confusion and disorder among the troops. Despite their superior numbers and defenses, the sheriff's men found themselves struggling to repel the relentless attacks from the determined rebels. As the siege progressed, the rebels' advantage grew. Their knowledge of the city, combined with the support of the commoners who provided vital intelligence and assistance, allowed them to make significant gains. The sheriff, realizing that his position was becoming increasingly untenable, tried to rally his troops and counter the uprising. But the tide of battle was turning against him. The revolt was far from over, and the outcome still uncertain. But with every passing hour, it became clear that Nottingham was on the brink of transformation. The people who had once lived under the yoke of tyranny were now fighting for their freedom, led by a man who had once been their lord and was now their champion. The siege of Nottingham was just beginning, and the struggle for justice and freedom was reaching its critical phase. The rebellion, born out of desperation and hope, was now a force that could not be easily defeated. The fate of Nottingham and its people hung in the balance as the battle raged on, with Robin Hood and his allies at the forefront of a revolution that would reshape their world. The sun rose on the final day of the siege with a dramatic intensity, casting a fiery glow over the battlefield as the decisive clash between Robin Hood's forces and the sheriff's men commenced. The air was thick with the sounds of clashing steel, the roar of battle cries, and the explosive blasts of siege weapons. Nottingham streets, once bustling with the mundane rhythm of city life, were now transformed into a chaotic battlefield. Robin's forces, though outnumbered, were fueled by a fierce determination to reclaim their city and end the sheriff's oppressive rule. Their strategy, honed through months of planning and skirmishes, was to strike hard and fast, targeting the most crucial points of the sheriff's defenses. The rebels advanced in waves, engaging the sheriff's soldiers with a combination of guerrilla tactics and direct assaults. The battle was fierce and relentless. Robin's archers, positioned strategically on rooftops and city walls, unleashed a deadly barrage of arrows, providing crucial support to the infantry below. The rebels used makeshift siege weapons, such as catapults and battering rams, to breach the sheriff's defenses and force their way into the heart of the city. Despite their numerical advantage, the sheriff's men were struggling to maintain their cohesion. The surprise and ferocity of the rebel assault, coupled with the growing dissent among the ranks, created confusion and disarray. The sheriff's forces were pushed back on multiple fronts, their defenses crumbling under the relentless pressure from the rebels. In the midst of the battle, Marian and Will Tillman played pivotal roles. Marian, leading a contingent of rebels, fought valiantly alongside Robin's forces. Her presence on the battlefield was both inspiring and strategic. She moved with precision, coordinating attacks and rallying her comrades. Her intimate knowledge of the city and its defenses allowed her to lead her troops effectively, exploiting weaknesses and guiding them through the chaos of battle. Will Tillman, the aspiring leader of the rebels and Marian's ally, was a key figure in the offensive. His leadership and tactical acumen were instrumental in orchestrating the assault. Will's forces targeted the sheriff's command centers and supply lines, aiming to disrupt the enemy's ability to sustain their defense. His skillful management of the rebel forces kept the momentum of the attack going, preventing the sheriff from regaining control. As the battle raged on, the relationship between Marian and Will became increasingly strained. Will, driven by his own ambitions and the desire for personal glory, began to act independently of Robin's plans. Marian found herself caught between her loyalty to Robin and her alliance with Will, creating tension and conflict in their leadership. Despite this, both Marian and Will were united in their common goal of overthrowing the sheriff, even as their differing approaches led to friction. Amidst the turmoil of battle, a singular confrontation loomed on the horizon: the duel between Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne. The two men, bound by a history of animosity and now facing each other on the battlefield, were about to engage in a clash that would determine not just their fates, but the outcome of the entire siege. As the battle reached its zenith, Robin, clad in his iconic green tunic, fought his way through the chaos towards Gisborne, who was commanding his troops from a fortified position. The two men's eyes met across the battlefield, a silent challenge passed between them. Robin, driven by a personal vendetta and the desire to end Gisborne's reign of terror, advanced with purpose. Gisborne, clad in his black armor, was a formidable opponent. He met Robin with a fierce intensity, their swords clashing in a spectacular display of skill and ferocity. The duel was not just a physical contest but a symbolic one, representing the struggle between justice and tyranny. The two men fought with all their might, their movements a blur of steel and motion. The duel was grueling, each man testing the other's strength and resolve. Gisborne, a seasoned warrior, had the advantage of experience and brute force, but Robin's agility and determination kept him in the fight. Their battle was a microcosm of the larger conflict, with every strike and parry reflecting the struggle for freedom and justice. In a climactic moment, Robin, using a combination of cunning and skill, managed to outmaneuver Gisborne. With a decisive strike, he disarmed his opponent and forced him to the ground. Gisborne, defeated and disheveled, was taken prisoner by Robin's forces. The fall of Gisborne was a significant blow to the sheriff's morale and marked a turning point in the battle. As the duel came to an end, Robin stood over Gisborne, a mix of triumph and exhaustion etched on his face. The battle continued to rage around him, but the defeat of Gisborne symbolized a victory for Robin and his allies. The tide of the battle had turned, and the momentum was now firmly on the side of the rebels. The siege of Nottingham was nearing its conclusion, with Robin Hood and his forces poised to achieve their long-sought victory. The clash of swords, the rallying cries of the rebels, and the final confrontation with Gisborne were all coming together to shape the outcome of the struggle for freedom and justice. As the battle for Nottingham intensified, a dark shadow loomed over Robin Hood's forces. Amidst the chaos and fervor of the siege, whispers of betrayal began to surface. It started with subtle signs: unexplained losses of supplies, a sudden increase in enemy intelligence, and unexpected breaches in the rebel lines. Robin's keen instincts and suspicion were piqued, but identifying the traitor proved elusive. The betrayal came to light when a trusted ally, a high-ranking member of Robin's inner circle, was caught red-handed passing vital information to the sheriff's forces. The traitor, driven by greed and fear, had been leaking strategic plans and troop movements, undermining the rebels' efforts and aiding the enemy from within. The discovery sent shockwaves through Robin's camp, shaking the morale of the rebels and causing a temporary disarray in their ranks. The traitor's actions had immediate and dire consequences. The sheriff's forces, now armed with insider knowledge, launched a counteroffensive, striking at key positions and causing significant losses for the rebels. The betrayal threatened to tip the balance of the battle, casting a dark cloud over what had been a promising assault. Robin, devastated by the betrayal but determined to maintain his focus, knew that swift action was needed. The traitor was dealt with decisively to prevent further damage, but the breach had already caused significant setbacks. The rebels, now facing an unexpected and intensified assault from the sheriff's forces, had to regroup and adapt to the shifting tides of battle. Amid the turmoil of the battle, Yahya faced a personal reckoning. The confrontation with his past was brought to the forefront when an old enemy appeared on the battlefield, one of the cardinal's trusted enforcers, a man with a deep grudge against Yahya. This enforcer, a ruthless and skilled fighter, sought revenge for past grievances and was determined to exact it during the battle. Yahya's encounter with this foe was both a physical and emotional struggle. The enforcer's presence was a painful reminder of Yahya's past sins and the reasons he had turned against the church and the cardinal. Their fight was intense, a brutal clash that revealed the deep scars of Yahya's history. As they battled, Yahya grappled with the weight of his past actions and the consequences they had wrought. The confrontation was not only a personal vendetta but also a critical moment in the battle. Yahya's opponent was a skilled combatant, and their duel threatened to further destabilize the rebel forces. As Yahya fought, he drew on his inner strength and determination, driven by the desire to atone for his past and ensure the success of the rebellion. In a dramatic turn, Yahya emerged victorious but deeply affected. The battle had taken a toll on him, both physically and emotionally. His victory over the enforcer was a testament to his resolve, but it also underscored the personal cost of the rebellion. Despite the victory, Yahya was left with a lingering sense of guilt and the heavy burden of his past. The betrayals and personal confrontations had pushed the battle to a critical juncture. Robin Hood, reeling from the impact of the traitor's actions and the intensified assault, had to rally his forces for a final push. The rebels, now demoralized and facing a renewed onslaught from the sheriff's men, needed a decisive strategy to reclaim the initiative. Robin, with the support of his remaining trusted allies, including a weary but resolute Yahya, devised a bold plan. Understanding that the battle's outcome hinged on a decisive action, he called for a concentrated offensive on the sheriff's command center. The goal was to break the enemy's will and force a decisive confrontation that could turn the tide in favor of the rebels. The final push began with a coordinated assault on the heart of the sheriff's defenses. Robin's forces, despite their exhaustion and losses, fought with renewed vigor and determination. The rebels pressed forward with a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the knowledge that the outcome of the battle, and their future, depended on their success. The battle reached its climax as Robin and his forces clashed with the sheriff's remaining troops in a fierce and desperate struggle. The confrontation was brutal and intense, with both sides fighting with everything they had. The turning point came when Robin led a daring charge into the heart of the enemy lines, targeting key positions and breaking through the sheriff's defenses. The tipping point of the battle was marked by a surge of hope and determination among the rebels. The sheriff's forces, now facing overwhelming odds and the relentless advance of the rebel troops, began to falter. The rebels, driven by their desire for freedom and justice, pressed their advantage, pushing the enemy back and securing key positions within the city. As the battle reached its climax, the sheriff's forces were forced into retreat. The rebels, battered but victorious, had managed to turn the tide and secure a crucial victory. The siege of Nottingham, marked by betrayal, personal confrontations, and intense combat, had reached its pivotal moment. The future of the city and its people now rested on the outcome of the final stages of the rebellion. With the sheriff's forces in disarray and the rebels gaining ground, Robin Hood knew that the final step to securing victory lay in capturing Nottingham Castle, the stronghold of the sheriff's power. The castle, perched on a commanding position, was both a symbol of tyranny and the last bastion of resistance. Its capture was essential to ending the sheriff's reign and liberating the city. The push to take the castle was fraught with peril. The castle's defenses were formidable, with high stone walls, fortified gates, and a well-armed garrison. Robin, determined and resolute, led his forces in a bold and risky assault. The rebels, despite their exhaustion from days of intense fighting, were driven by the urgency of their mission and the prospect of ending the long-standing oppression. Robin's strategy was to launch a multi-pronged attack. He ordered a diversionary assault on the outer defenses to draw the sheriff's men away from the main assault force. Under the cover of this diversion, a smaller, elite group of rebels, led by Robin himself, moved to breach the castle walls. The plan required precise timing and coordination, with every moment critical to the success of the operation. The assault on Nottingham Castle was intense and chaotic. The rebels used scaling ladders, siege towers, and battering rams to assault the walls. The castle's defenders, although weary, fought with desperation to repel the invaders. The clash of weapons, the roar of battle cries, and the thunder of siege engines filled the air as the two sides battled for control of the fortress. As the battle for the castle walls raged on, Robin Hood's focus turned to the final confrontation with the sheriff. The sheriff, having retreated to the inner sanctum of the castle, prepared for a last stand. The confrontation was inevitable, and Robin, fueled by a mixture of anger, resolve, and the need for justice, advanced towards the sheriff's stronghold. The final showdown was both a physical and symbolic clash. Robin and his remaining allies fought their way through the castle's inner defenses, encountering the sheriff's most loyal guards and overcoming them with relentless determination. The path to the sheriff was a gauntlet of fierce combat, but Robin's leadership and the rebels' resolve carried them through. At last, Robin reached the sheriff's chamber. The sheriff, now cornered and desperate, faced Robin with a mix of defiance and fear. The two men, embodying the conflict between tyranny and justice, faced off in a climactic duel. Their battle was intense, a brutal exchange of blows that highlighted the stakes of their confrontation. Robin, driven by the memories of his people's suffering and his own quest for redemption, fought with unyielding resolve. The sheriff, though skilled, was no match for Robin's determination. In a dramatic and decisive moment, Robin overpowered the sheriff, defeating him and ending his reign of oppression. With the sheriff defeated and Nottingham Castle taken, the battle seemed won. However, the cost of victory was evident. The rebels, while triumphant, had endured heavy losses. The siege had taken a toll on their numbers and morale, and the city was left in a state of disarray. The victory came with a heavy price. The once oppressed people of Nottingham now faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives and their city. The scars of battle and the damage inflicted on the city were stark reminders of the struggle they had endured. The cost of freedom was high, and the process of healing and reconstruction would be long and difficult. Robin Hood, though victorious, was deeply affected by the toll the conflict had taken on those he cared about. The final stand had secured a new beginning for Nottingham, but it had also brought a profound realization of the personal sacrifices involved in the fight for justice and freedom. In the aftermath of the battle, Robin, Marian, and their allies began the arduous task of restoring order and ensuring that the lessons learned from the conflict would guide the future of Nottingham. The city, though battered and scarred, stood as a symbol of resilience and hope, with Robin Hood's final stand marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. As the dust settled over Nottingham, the city emerged from the chaos of battle, scarred but victorious. The once proud streets were now littered with the remnants of the conflict, broken buildings, discarded weapons, and the silent testimonies of those who had fought and fallen. The rebels, though triumphant, were left to confront the reality of their hard-won victory and the profound impact of their struggle. The initial sense of elation among the victors was tempered by the heavy toll of the battle. The city's residents, once oppressed and downtrodden, began the arduous process of rebuilding their lives. The sounds of reconstruction mingled with the sorrowful notes of mourning, as families grieved the loss of loved ones and the wounds of war were tended to. Robin Hood and his allies, despite their success, faced the grim task of managing the aftermath of the conflict. The city was in disarray, and the challenges of restoring order and addressing the needs of the people were daunting. The victory had come at a high price, and the process of healing and rebuilding would be long and difficult. With Nottingham Castle taken and the sheriff defeated, attention turned to the remaining symbols of corruption and tyranny, the cardinal and the sheriff. Both men, now captured and stripped of their power, faced the consequences of their actions. The cardinal, who had been a key architect of the war and a manipulator of both the church and the government, was brought to justice. His influence and corruption had fueled the conflict and contributed to the suffering of countless individuals. The rebels, determined to dismantle the corrupt system, held a tribunal to address the cardinal's crimes. The trial was a symbolic moment of reckoning, representing the triumph of justice over corruption. The cardinal's fate was grim. Found guilty of his crimes, he was sentenced to a life of imprisonment, stripped of his power and status. His fall from grace served as a stark reminder of the consequences of abusing authority and manipulating the lives of others. The sheriff, defeated and captured, faced a similar fate. His tyranny had been a central source of the city's suffering, and his downfall was a significant victory for the people of Nottingham. The sheriff's trial was swift, and his fate was a reflection of the justice that had been so long denied to the city. He was imprisoned, his assets confiscated, and his reign of oppression brought to an end. The cost of victory was deeply felt among Robin Hood's forces. The battle had been fierce and costly, and the toll on the rebels was significant. Many of Robin's closest allies had been injured or killed, and the impact of their loss was deeply felt within the ranks. The rebel camp, once a symbol of hope and determination, was now a place of mourning and reflection. The loss of comrades weighed heavily on those who survived, and the victory, while significant, was bittersweet. The cost of war was evident in the empty places left by fallen friends and the physical and emotional scars borne by the survivors. Robin Hood, though triumphant, was profoundly affected by the loss and suffering that had accompanied the conflict. The victory, while achieving its goal of ending the sheriff's tyranny, had come at the expense of many lives and much suffering. The burden of leadership was evident as Robin faced the task of guiding his people through the aftermath of the battle and honoring the memory of those who had sacrificed so much. The city of Nottingham, now free from the grip of tyranny, faced the challenge of rebuilding and healing. The cost of war had been high, and the process of recovery would require time, effort, and unity. The resilience of the people and their determination to build a better future were the key to overcoming the scars of the past and forging a new beginning for the city and its inhabitants. As the sun rose over Nottingham, it cast a warm light on a city that had endured the darkest of times. The fall of Nottingham Castle and the defeat of the sheriff marked the beginning of a new era for the city. The once oppressed inhabitants, now liberated from tyranny, emerged from their homes to witness the dawn of their newfound freedom. The atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. The city's streets, once echoing with the sounds of conflict and despair, were now filled with the sounds of rebuilding and renewal. The rebels, having triumphed over their oppressors, began the process of restoring order and ensuring that the promises of their struggle were fulfilled. The liberation was not just a physical victory but a symbolic one, representing the triumph of justice and the resilience of the human spirit. Robin Hood and his allies worked tirelessly alongside the citizens to help repair the damage wrought by the battle and to re-establish the institutions and systems that would support a fair and just society. The city, though scarred, began to transform as new leadership emerged and the people took their place in shaping their future. With the liberation of Nottingham came a surge of hope and possibility. The people, who had long lived under the shadow of oppression, were now free to envision a different future. The air was filled with a renewed sense of purpose as individuals and families came together to rebuild their lives, and their city. Community gatherings, once rare under the sheriff's rule, became more frequent as the people sought to reconnect and forge a new path forward. The shared experience of struggle and victory fostered a strong sense of unity and collective determination. The vision of a city where justice, fairness, and prosperity could flourish began to take shape. Guided by the lessons learned from the recent conflict, the citizens of Nottingham, inspired by their newfound freedom, began to engage in initiatives that aimed to address the inequalities and injustices that had long plagued their society. There was a palpable excitement and energy as they worked to create a more equitable and inclusive community. The promise of a better future was within reach, and the people were determined to seize it. In the midst of the city's transformation, Robin Hood and Marian finally reunited. Their separation, marked by the trials of war and the complexities of their respective struggles, had been a source of deep personal pain. Yet, their love and commitment to each other endured despite the challenges they faced. Their reunion was a moment of profound emotion. The hardships they had endured, the battles fought, and the sacrifices made all converged in this poignant moment of togetherness. Robin and Marian embraced, finding solace and strength in each other's presence. Their reunion symbolized the resilience of their love and their shared vision for a better future. As they stood together, Robin and Marian looked out over the city they had fought so hard to liberate. The challenges of the past were not forgotten, but the promise of a new beginning offered hope and renewal. Their love, once tested by adversity, was now a source of inspiration and motivation as they worked together to help guide Nottingham into a new era. The new dawn of Nottingham was marked by a sense of optimism and possibility. The city, once a place of suffering and oppression, was now a beacon of hope and renewal. With Robin and Marian leading the way, the people of Nottingham began to build a future where justice, equality, and prosperity could thrive. The new chapter of their lives was just beginning, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow lay ahead. The dawn of a new era in Nottingham brought with it the monumental task of rebuilding. The city, scarred by the recent conflict, required a concerted effort to restore its physical infrastructure and repair the social fabric that had been torn apart. The streets, once filled with the sounds of battle, now echoed with the clamor of reconstruction. Robin Hood and his allies played a crucial role in the rebuilding process. They worked alongside the city's inhabitants, focusing on repairing damaged buildings, clearing debris, and restoring essential services. The emphasis was not only on physical reconstruction but also on fostering a sense of community and collaboration among the citizens. Community meetings were held to involve everyone in the rebuilding efforts. The people of Nottingham came together to address the needs of their neighbors, share resources, and plan for the future. The spirit of cooperation and mutual support was palpable as individuals contributed their skills and efforts to the common goal. Robin and Marian, along with other leaders, focused on establishing fair and just systems to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. They worked on creating mechanisms for civic engagement, ensuring that the voices of all citizens were heard and valued. The goal was to build a city that was not only physically restored but also grounded in principles of justice, equality, and inclusivity. As Nottingham began to recover and rebuild, Robin Hood faced a pivotal decision about his own future. His role as an outlaw hero had been instrumental in the city's liberation, but with the sheriff defeated and the city on the path to recovery, Robin grappled with the question of his place in this new chapter. Robin had always been driven by a sense of justice and a desire to help those in need. With the end of the conflict, he contemplated whether to continue in a leadership role within Nottingham or to step back and allow others to take charge. He was deeply aware of the sacrifices made and the personal toll the struggle had taken on him. After much reflection, Robin decided to remain involved in the city's affairs, but in a more supportive capacity. He chose to focus on mentoring and guiding the new generation of leaders, helping them to build on the foundations of the new Nottingham. His role would be that of a guardian of the values and principles that had guided the fight for freedom, ensuring that they remained at the heart of the city's future. Robin's decision was not without its challenges. He continued to face the emotional and psychological impacts of the conflict, but he found solace in his continued commitment to the people and the city he had fought so hard to protect. The story of Robin Hood, the outlaw hero, became a source of inspiration and legend for the people of Nottingham and beyond. His bravery, commitment to justice, and willingness to fight for the oppressed left an indelible mark on the city's history. As Nottingham rebuilt and thrived, Robin's legacy was honored and celebrated. The tales of his heroism, his struggles, and his triumphs were passed down through generations, becoming a symbol of courage and hope. Monuments were erected, songs were sung, and stories were shared, ensuring that the memory of Robin Hood's contributions would endure. The enduring legacy of Robin Hood was not only in the physical changes he helped bring about but also in the values he instilled in the community. His fight for justice, his commitment to equality, and his dedication to helping those in need became guiding principles for the new Nottingham. The city, shaped by his actions and ideals, stood as a testament to the power of resilience and the impact of a single individual's quest for justice. As Nottingham looked to the future, it did so with a sense of hope and determination, inspired by the legacy of Robin Hood. The road ahead was filled with challenges and opportunities, but the foundation of a just and equitable society was firmly established, and the spirit of the outlaw hero continued to guide and inspire the people of Nottingham.